Okay.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thank you, Yeni. Yes, it was here.
Yeah, thanks. That's all right. So welcome to the New Perspectives on Russia and Eurasia seminar. My name is Margarita Zavatsky, and I'm happy to actually give a floor today to our speaker, Polina Kislitsyna, who's a Ph.D. candidate, MA in Cultural Anthropology, and also a visiting fellow at the Aleksanteri Institute. And she will be talking about things that are not safe to discuss in Russia. So, but luckily, we are in a very good place to do it right here. It's called Modes of Explanation for Sexuality in Russian Non-Heterosexual Biographical Narratives. We have online and offline audience. So if you have any questions or comments or anything you want to share, or something actually isn't right, I know you don't hear the presentation, you just see the slides, just don't hesitate to shoot us a message, and we'll try to do whatever we can at the moment. So, and we also have a discussant, Dr. Rajana Buyantuyeva from the Free University of Brussels, Université Libre de Bruxelles. So if I want to show off and just demonstrate my language skills. So the format would be quite as usual. So Polina, you have 30-40 minutes for your talk, so no need to rush. And then I'll give the floor to Rajana, about maybe 15-20 minutes. And then I'll open the floor to the rest of the audience, both online and offline. And of course, if you have like burning immediate comments, so just don't hesitate to leave them or to raise your hand if you like really want to say something. But otherwise, I think we are good to go. So Polina, the floor is yours.
Okay, before I start my presentation, I would like to say some things. First of all, thank you, all of you, for coming here. Thank you, Margarita, for introduction. Thank you, Rajana. Thank you so much for agreeing to be my discussant at the last moment. And thanks to Aleksanteri Institute for hosting me this month. It's a high honor and responsibility for me to present today before all of you. So I'm a little bit nervous. I have a little experience doing long presentations in English, so I can make mistakes. And I'm sorry for this in advance. And my last point before beginning, it's the last part of my dissertation. It's a raw text that I wrote recently. So today you are my first listeners and critics, and all your comments and questions will be very useful and appreciated. Well, let me start. Talking about their lives, most non-heterosexual men and women explain their sexuality one way or another. They do it explicitly in answering the relevant question of the interviewer, my question. Also, they do it implicitly by constructing their stories in a certain way. For instance, some participants highlight that they were born this way, and their non-heterosexuality was evident for them from a very early age, while others describe different events in their lives that could determine or affect their sexuality. My presentation seeks to systematize modes of explanation for sexuality used implicitly and explicitly by my participants. These modes have social conditioning and consequences that I seek to demonstrate. Before I demonstrate my results, I conceptualize modes of explanation as a tool of analysis and overview scientific explanations for non-heterosexuality and Russian political context. In terms of methodology, this research is based on biographical and narrative analysis of 49 interviews and 37 written life stories collected from non-heterosexual men and women aged 18 to 64. The average age of the interviewees is 36. The average age of the authors of written autobiographies is 28. Interviews, 20 male and 29 female, were collected using a snowball method. Snowball sample in 2018 in St Petersburg and Moscow. Written autobiographies were obtained through a competition organized by me with support of independent Russian website, the It's web source about contemporary art and culture. Both the interviews and the written stories cover the personal lives of my participants from early childhood to the moment of the interview or competition, with a focus on sexual biography, like in work of Anna Rothkirch, who analyzes Russian written autobiography about love and sex. My participants' education, employment, and lifestyle differ, but for the most part, they are educated people living in Russian megacities, mainly in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and earning an average income. Because my sample is quite homogeneous, my findings cannot be said to be representative for all non-heterosexual people in Russia, of course. Nonetheless, most participants who have lived in Moscow or St. Petersburg at the moment of research were born and grew up in various regions of Russia, so their homosexual or bisexual experiences were not limited to the Russian largest cities. As for my terminology, I use the term non-heterosexual people. It may be problematic, I know, but I use it as an umbrella term that includes homosexual, bisexual, pansexual people, as well as those who have a homosexual experience one way or another, but do not identify themselves in a particular way, or do use various identities for description of different periods of their lives, or different identities in different parts of the stories. It seems to me that the term non-heterosexual is the most appropriate, since it allows a capacious description of all the listed categories without imposing on any of the participants the identities that are aligned for them. My usage of non-heterosexual is inspired by work Francesca Stella. My next point, modes of explanation. Since I consider biographical narratives, it is relevant to see what role explanatory mode can play in life stories. Charlotte Linden writes about how the illusory coherence of the biographical narratives is affirmed both at the level of vocabulary and syntax and at the level of social practices. The researcher, Linden, identifies two main principles for the coherence of life stories. It's causality and continuity. Using the example of biographical stories about choosing a profession, she demonstrates various narrative strategies, maintaining the consistentness or wholeness of narratives and reveals systems of coherence. By coherence systems, Linde understands cultural divides for structuring experience into socially shareable net. Such systems occupy an intermediate position between common sense and expert knowledge. It is a system of beliefs derived from expert systems, but used by someone who with no corresponding expertise or credentials. She considers popular Freudian psychology, behavioral psychology, and astrology as the coherence systems used in the story of why people choose this or that occupation. Psychology has been becoming an even more popular explanatory model due to a social trend that researchers call the therapeutic turn. Psychoanalysis, together with popular psychology and self-help literature, as if Roos writes, have had a tremendous influence on modern Western culture, in our culture. Roos describes how, under this influence, reinforced by increasing consumerism, therapeutic culture and therapeutic narrative are formed, in the center of which is the self and self-realization. thanks to popular culture and the development of psychotherapy market, therapeutic narrative is becoming the dominant way of talking about oneself. Its main feature is the organization of the story around trauma and psychological suffering, which are an obstacle to the true self. Yeah? The narrator reports on suffering experienced in childhood and then describes the impact on his or her present. In other words, in our therapeutic culture, any explanation of person's choices or actions include child experiences. Besides, a loose notes that feminist and gay liberation movements have been embracing and popularizing the therapeutic discourse as it corresponded to their tasks. As for explanation, scientific explanation for sexuality. All the pioneers of sexology and the first defenders of homosexuality, for example, Karl Ulrichs, Richard von Krafft-Ebing, and Magnus Hirschfeld, appealed to its innate nature, suggesting various biological reasons for its appearance of homosexuality. Since the 1970s, the gay liberation movement has been booming, and the sexual preference has been constructed as a political identity linked to the personal identity. Questions of causality are relegated to the background. However, already in the 1980s, the HIV epidemic began. The non-heterosexual body again became the object of medical attention and was pathologized in medical texts and media, and HIV and AIDS were called the gay plague, and so on. From the end of the 20th century to the present, sociobiological research has been carried out aiming to find out the causes of human homosexuality. Researchers are trying to explain homosexual behavior by various biological factors: hormones, brain structure, genes. The rise of research looking for the gay gene is associated with the launch of the Human Genome Project in 1989, the popularization of genetics, and the search for genetic foundations for various all aspects of human behavior. Most of these sociobiological studies do not problematize the very concept of homosexuality. The researchers confuse sexual desire and sexual identity and gender identity, and approach the selection of research participants, that is, those whom they consider homosexual, inconsistently. Susanna Walters also points out that these studies are predominantly focused on male homosexuality, and they hypotheses implicitly contain many cultural assumptions and gender stereotypes, for example, that homosexual men are feminine. In addition, a genetic justification is always sought for homosexual behavior, but not for heterosexual one, which both testifies to the dominant view of heterosexuality as a naturalized norm and contributes to its establishment. Nonetheless, sociobiology has become common sense, as Lancaster wrote. The biological explanation of homosexuality is becoming the most common justification for human rights rhetoric and concept of sexual citizenship, using the slogan from this way. This tendency can be named by strategic essentialism, as Spivak explained, it a political tactic of mobilization around minorities' identities. However, this tactic has political restrictions, as Walters shows. Instead of integrating LGBTQ plus people into society, the born this way argument turns out to be a trap, as if LGBT plus people have rights only insofar as their sexuality or gender has a biological basis. Besides, such rhetoric excludes bisexuality, as some critics emphasize, because innateness of homosexuality or heterosexuality leaves no room for sexual fluidity or binarity. I will not say many words about social constructivism and queer theory. We all social researchers, we know what means socially constructed. But I need to clarify my position. As a social researcher, I cannot oppose biological arguments. I cannot judge on gay gen or something like this. However, as a social researcher, again, I consider sexuality as a social phenomenon. So I do not talk about how it actually works. But my point is how people use different explanatory modes or beliefs in their narratives and why. Russian context. As I know, Ratana Boyantova did a perfect presentation this Monday about the Russian context in terms of state homophobia and repressions in Russia. So I will say a few words. Over the last 20 years, Russia has seen an increase in traditionalist and homophobic sentiments. This has been accompanied by a resurgence of nationalism, which is a source of political legitimacy, of the reinvention of the Russian national identity includes retraditionalization of gender roles. In official discourse, homosexuality has been perceived as a threat exported from the West to the Russian nation and culture. Moral panic around homosexuality regularly rises in Russian media. Rhetoric in support of increasing the birth rate and saving children from indecent assault has been simultaneously emerging. In this context, conservative groups have created concepts of traditional values and propaganda of non-traditional sexuality, which were expressed in legal norms later. A federal law banning the spread of propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships among minors was adopted in 2013. Since the law's introduction, there has been a spike in cases of physical violence motivated by homophobia. This law has many other negative consequences, such as increasing instances of everyday homophobia and higher need for self-censorship in public sphere. In the context of the need to counter the conservative discourse of the state, which uses the concept of propaganda, strategic essentialism takes on special significance for activists. Therefore, it's not surprising that Russian LGBT plus activists actively use biological explanations. A striking recent example is Karen Sheyan's educational video on YouTube on sexuality. It's named Queer Prosvet, Queer Education, where the journalist popularizes the biological basis for non-heterosexuality, despite queer in the title of the project. And now I'm turning to my result. During the interview, I asked all my participants whether they thought about the reasons for their sexual otherness and heterosexuality. In a sense, I forced them to formulate their position on this issue, even if they might not have thought about it before. However, some participants began to share their ideas on the subject, anticipating my questions. Some authors of written autobiographies also touched on this topic, although the contest announcement did not offer such a question for discussion. The participants independently chose to write about it, considering their thoughts on the reason for their non-heterosexuality as a significant part of their self-narratives. Accordingly, this issue was relevant for many without my interventions. Before talking about the explanatory modes of sexuality that my informant adhered to, it is worth discussing the context of their knowledge. Where did they get information about the causes of non-heterosexuality and whether they tried to find out anything at all? Indeed, sexual identity formation often includes the study of literature or other information sources available to my participants. Thus, the participant talked about how he tried to deal with his homosexuality. I will not read quotation, you can do it by your own. By listening by listing all the sources available to him, to the participant, he simultaneously demonstrates the amount of work done and the limited information available to him in the early 2000s. It is worth noting that he mentions ical. Several participants also talked about being familiar with his work. Igor is a Soviet and Russian sociologist and psychologist, pioneer of sexuality studies in Russia, and author of several books in Russian on sexuality and homosexuality in particular. He can be named a significant figure in the eyes of many participants. His name is most mentioned in the context of scientific or popular science literature on homosexuality. Another figure mentioned in this context was Sigmund Freud. A story about a keen interest in sexuality research or scientific knowledge can also be a way of self-presentation, a demonstration of erudition, a hobby, or research background. For example, a participant who graduated faculty of biology and worked as a microbiologist emphasized that his natural science basis formed his point of view on sexuality and causes of homosexuality. Another participant described his fascination with the popular presentation of scientific research as follows. He said, I am a bit of a pop science nerd. The narrator emphasizes that he trusts only proven facts. The scientific nature of information he consumes is decisive for him. In this way, speaking about the explanatory modes used by my participants, we are not dealing just with vernacular sexology far from academic research, no, but with the perception of scientific knowledge, the inclusion of elements of scientific discourse in everyday knowledge and discursive strategy of my participants. In this process, there is room for distortion or a selective approach pursuing one or another pragmatics. One of my participants reflexively noted how scientific knowledge could be distorted in the process of perception, describing the influence of Igor Kohn's books on his formation. He wrote about himself in the second person. Well, you discover the works of Igor Semyonovich Kohn on the net and immediately buy into them. So on. You understand something correctly. No AIDS and certain deaths from unwashed hands do not threaten you. Your other conclusions are wrong, but so convenient that you cannot resist. The narrator describes how he was fascinated by Kohn's research, while respectively assessing that he interpreted the information received from the book in accordance with how he identified himself at that time, since at that time he was not yet sure of his homosexuality. He strived for normalization, and he focused on these thesis that confirms the flexibility on the young man's sexuality. It is an excellent illustration, as I think, of the selective approach to complex academic knowledge about sexuality, which I will return to when describing a specific explanatory mode. Among my participants, An essentialist view on sexuality or its biologization is the most popular option for explanatory mode. Most were inclined to believe that the predisposition to non-heterosexual behavior is innate and has biological prerequisites. For many participants, it was precisely homosexuality that was innate and unchanging. Accordingly, they saw sexuality as discrete, with no room for flexibility or variability. Some pointed directly to genetics. For example, I think in my case, it is due more to genetic factors because my sense of self has been constant since childhood. Others appeal to the influence of hormones and brain function. The second participant said, I already knew for sure that I like guys. I have known this since I was 6. Now I understand that this is hardly a passion influence on the life. It has something to do with the brain, with hormones. Both narrators link the scientific explanation of their homosexuality to personal feelings. In their life stories, biological knowledge confirms and legitimizes personal experiences, and vice versa, the perception of their sexuality proves the essentialist explanatory mode. The essentialist mode of explanation cannot only be associated with the interpretation of personal experience, but also implicitly oppose the notion of gay propaganda, exposure to social influence. Thus, my lesbian participant said, you are definitely born with it, because, well, when I started getting suspicious on homosexuality, it was 1985, there is no information. Yeah? The discovery of homosexual attraction in the absence of any information, any external knowledge about it, serves both as an argument in favor of its innateness and as a counter-argument in an implicit dispute with homophobic discourse emanating from rational legislators. Some participants separate sexual attraction as something with biological prerequisites and sexual identity as a socially constructed concept. This position is characteristic of those whose education or erudition allows them to discuss the social theory of sexuality or the ability of biology to explain complex phenomena. Thus, the author of a queer biography, as he titled his text himself, prepared his reflection on what it means to become gay in terms of identity with the following words. Of course, it's not about sexual attraction to members of the same sex. It has already been proven that these characteristics are inherent from birth and cannot be changed. The narrator demonstrated his familiarity with queer theory, not only with the help of the title, but also by making references to its various states throughout the text. In his narrative, queer is combined with an essentialist vision of sexual attraction. Besides, I had cited the participant before when I demonstrated his reflection on selective approach and perceptual distortion. Ironically, here we can see again his selective approach towards both queer theory and the works of Kohn, who tended to a multifactorial explanation of homosexual attraction, in which biological factors played a role in combination with others and were not decisive. Some bisexual participants also described their bisexuality as an innate characteristics. For example, a bisexual woman wrote, I have no answer to the question why I'm bisexual, but it happened. Yes, it's been in me since my birth. Many participants with different identities and different experiences carried out this logical connection between the absence of visible reasons, visible forms of non-heterosexuality and its biologization. For instance, gay man said about himself, "I was just born this way. I see no other reasons." After searching for external circumstances that could affect their sexuality and finding nothing, then the participants tend to the essentialist view. If, as they think, nothing influenced them from the outside, then the reasons lay inside, in their biological structure. The essentialist view could be expressed implicitly. For example, when the participants describe their sexuality in terms of natural or естественное in Russian, in different parts of their lives. Thus, a bisexual participant wrote about their bisexuality, "My natural instincts." Another participant, in other words, the narrator describes her sexuality as a kind of inborn form of behavior in natural reality. Another participant wrote about her lesbian identity. It is as natural to me as that I was born a woman, that I have brown eyes or dark hair. The homosexuality of the narrator is equated with other innate characteristics of physical attributes, like color of eyes, color of hairs. The categories of natural often describe the first sexual experience. For example, the participant described her first sexual experience with a woman. It was so natural and self-evident. Intuitive knowledge of sexual practices serves as a confirmation of naturalness. It seems to be provided for by the natural order of things. Another participant said about his first sexual experience with a man. It seems to me more natural than if I went with a girl. In his assessment, heterosexuality turns out to be unnatural, which on the contrary leads to the essentialization of homosexuality. This discursive strategy of naturalness can also be an implicit debate with a pathological view of homosexuality or bisexuality, according to which non-heterosexuality is unnatural, is a perversion. In addition, the very word естественный, natural, has the meaning normal, ordinary. Perhaps the participants primarily emphasize the normality of their sexuality, not having in mind its innate nature. However, whether the speakers want it or not, this epithet, this word, essentializes the subject of the description. Another popular mode of explanation for non-heterosexuality is psychoanalysis in broad sense, which includes a complex of popular everyday ideas about the subconscious and psychology in general. The psychoanalytic or psychological explanations of non-heterosexuality is more individualized, with each participant offering unique explanations. For instance, a homosexual man sees the reasons for his homosexuality in, its quotation, lack of education from his father. While a non-heterosexual woman believes that her mother's, quotation too, emotional coldness led to her non-heterosexuality. The literal or emotional absence of a parent of the opposite sex, mother for women, father for men, can be interpreted as a prerequisite for non-heterosexual behavior, which conforms to the role of the parent in the formation of sexuality and more broadly the human psyche, with which psychoanalysis assigns. Another participant saw the cause of his homosexuality in an overprotective, by his definition, mother. The narrator implies that his mother turned him away from heterosexual relationships by intrusive and frightening talk. In an interview, he repeats several times that he chose homosexual relationships for himself as simpler, more comfortable, more understandable. Another participant sees as a possible influence on his sexuality not only the absence of his father, this fact is just the background of his story, but also the behavior of women in the family, his mother and sister, who, as he wrote, they did not hesitate to walk around our modest apartment half naked or sometimes even naked. For me, it removes the veil of the intimate secrecy of the female body every time. The participant contrasts the forced encounter with female nudity, which, as he believes, deprived him of sexual interest in the female body, and the desire to see the male body, which turned out to be less accessible and more intriguing and in this situation. In all psychoanalytic explanations, parents appear who, according to the participants, somehow influenced the formation of their sexuality. The implicit manifestation of this explanatory mode can be expressed by the use of psychological terms. For example, the participant used the term of accentuation when she described how her parents punished her for acting out a sex scene with a friend in childhood. It's not about sexual interaction, but just game in sex. All participants adhere to this mode of explanations also have in common that they tend to explain their sexual preferences in terms of choice. Their experience includes different relationships, both homosexual and heterosexual. They describe their sexuality as more flexible, able to change, which does not negate a stable homosexual self-identification in most cases. Some participants switch between different explanatory modes when talking about their personal experiences and other people. Thus, the participant clarified her position. I don't think it's innate. I think it's innate in me. The narrator emphasizes that the essentialist approach is relevant to her experience, but might not apply to others. Views on the causes of non-heterosexuality could change over time, depending on different circumstances. For example, a lesbian described in detail the history of her views. You can read this long story. Here you can see how the narrator's idea changed depending on the context in which she was, how she identified herself, and what events she saw as fundamental to her life story. The way she evaluates her own experience does not fit in the constructivist conception offered by feminist theorists. So she chooses as essentialist position that is better suited to explain her personal feelings. Some participants declaratively rejected the whole idea of causality. They considered the search for reasons for non-heterosexuality meaningless or uninteresting for them. Thus, a homosexual man replied when I asked him if he ever thought about the reasons for his homosexuality. I concluded a long time ago that it doesn't matter for me. Another participant gave an even more detailed answer with similar reasoning. The narrator believes that the need to look for a cause is related to the problematic nature of the phenomenon. Since her sexuality is not a problem for her, she does not consider it necessary to look for any explanation. At the same time, she also draws an analogy with ical. She said, I've never wondered why I have brown eyes. Brown? Okay, brown. It's interesting for me to understand why when some problem arises from it. In this juxtaposition, we can see an essentialization, perhaps unintentional. My last example, before conclusion, has romantic relations. It's about love. One of the authors of written autobiographies concluded her story by writing, talking about how and why I came to homosexual self-identification. I'm increasingly afraid that someone clever, I suppose it's about researcher, will read my text and understand that the reasons are hidden in childhood, family problems, or early experience. It's not about love. The participant introduces an external view into her narrative, which objectifies her story and finds a scientific explanation in it. She actively resists this interpretation of her biography. In this case, the refusal to search for an objective reason is a refusal to universalize personal experience, to simplify it. Any explanation, biology or analysis or something else, seems offensive to the narrator. She perceives any explanation mode as routinization and derogation of feelings and experiences significant to her. And finally, my conclusion. Therefore, using one or another explanatory mode, the participants chose a concept that was clear and consistent for them, supported by authoritative knowledge. Here one can see the need for categorization, as anthropologist Mary Douglas wrote, the need to fit one's experience into understandable, shareable social categories. And scientific concepts fulfill their function. The essentialist explanatory mode turns out to be the most popular because, firstly, it's the simplest, concise, and does not require deep immersion. The formula born this way, or as my participants most often said, it's innate, inborn, это врожденное in Russian, is compact and understandable even to a non-specialist, unlike other views on sexuality like social constructivism, queer theory, and psychoanalysis. Secondly, natural science knowledge has more authority than social, unfortunately. Biology terms seem more scientific. Participants often appeal specifically to the scientific nature and proof of the essentialist concept. Third, biological reasoning has political potential. It can be a counter-argument against homophobic rhetoric about gay propaganda, promiscuity, or sinfulness, while other explanatory modes can be interpreted as propaganda or bad influence, and therefore they can be assessed as politically dangerous. Any explanatory mode is a convenient narrative frame for describing the participants' life experiences. On the one hand, it contributes to the coherence of story. It is a way to bring all the narrative elements together consistently. On the other hand, it reflects the assessment of the narrators. If their narratives are fragmented, sexuality is presented as flexible or changing. So they are more likely to choose a psychological or constructivist mode of explanation. However, if they strive more for coherence and consistency, recreate a detailed genealogy of their feelings, the essentialist explanation turns out to be the most lasting glue for their narratives. That's all. Thank you for attention. I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Polina. That was very amazing. So, especially those excerpts from the interviews and the way it's quite revelating. But without any further ado, let me give the floor to Rajan.
Right. Thank you very much. So I'd like to thank Polina for this interesting presentation, and the topic is very stimulating, I find. And so let me dive into. So I think like that any definition understanding of homosexuality is very complex, right? So according to the World Health Organization, and maybe all of us know this definition, right? So what we see, understand as sexuality, right? So what is sexuality? It's a central aspect of being human throughout your life. So it is practiced and articulated in what we are, what we experience, what we think, what we do. So basically, sexuality emerges in the interplay among biological, psychological, socioeconomic, cultural, ethical, religious, or even spiritual factors. So furthermore, people show the tendency to control what they fear the most. And many men fear non-heteronormativity and non-heteronormative sexualities precisely because they challenge and move beyond hegemonic heteronormativity and masculinity. And that's actually threatens their perceptions of masculinity. So the tendency to contain and control non-heteronormativity, so what they precisely don't understand and fear, is evident across the globe and like throughout all the histories. So we can see mainstream social discourses and practices which maintain a rigid hegemonic heterosexual structure and system. So any sexual behaviors and desire that fall outside of this system are presented as pathological or deviant or thick or like or illness or whatever. So it's always framed in a bad way. In countries like Russia, where heteronormativity and masculinity are actively promoted, and where the expression of anything non-heteronormative sexualities are often silenced, non-heteronormative individuals have to face these realities and try to make sense of them and also to deal with them in their own way. So in these slides, I think it is critical and it's critically important to give voices to stories outside mainstream discourses, which would allow us to engage with alternative perspectives and experiences. So these narratives are very important. They reveal what it means to belong, what it means to be of value. And they also could provide us with concrete scenarios of the issues experienced by non-heterosexual individuals. Investigated people's understanding of their sexuality through their narratives is a very interesting and challenging endeavor, and I think we can learn a lot from it. And Polina examines how non-heterosexual Russians explain their sexuality. And I can see that considerable work has been done into assembling and examining the data. Your paper could build actually a stronger conceptualization, explaining why we need to know what non-heterosexual Russians think about their sexuality, what do we learn from that, and how the research fits into a broader scholarship of sexuality, including the research on sexualities in non-Western localities. And for example, one of the debate that the paper could contribute would be the long-standing conversation about the applicability of Western style identities to non-Western lives. And also the article examines narratives which present interesting social landscape that are related by the narrators who choose what and how to tell. In your paper, the ways of remembering and constructing the narratives can be shaped by broader socio-political and cultural contexts and systems. Also by the system of oppression, which are linked to the discourses of heteronormativity and morality. Furthermore, intersectionality and feminist post-structuralist theory, which views identity as multiple, fluid, and constructed in relation to others, could be helpful in situating the narratives within wider sociopolitical, cultural, and historical contexts, where the narrators try to understand their sexuality. That would allow us to get a deep understanding of their unique experiences and the process of construction itself. Perhaps it also would be useful to include a short positionality about yourself and a short ethics statement, which would discuss your relationship to and reflection upon the research subjects, research participants, and the relationship between the researcher and the narrators, who currently are presented as faceless gay man, lesbian woman, so which of course is warranted by their consideration of safety and confidentiality, but maybe choosing a different identification approach would, like using pseudonyms, for example, would actually make them more human and relatable. And overall, the paper is dedicated to a very interesting topic, and I think it has a very great potential. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Jana, for very useful comments. Well, I thought about pseudonyms because I know it's very complicated to understand what narratives, how many narratives I use in my text. But now I think it might be useful because the text of all my dissertation is very fragmented, not personal, and it's because it's about narrative construction. It's well, I demonstrate many fragments, and it's well, it's like a whole discursive space where different parts of narrative are well, they are together and well, I don't know, it's like a flow of different stories. I don't know. I'm just finalizing my text, so I can change it, but maybe pseudonyms will be useful. As for my self-positionality, it's my self-censor problem, maybe, because in Russian tradition there is no room for the self-researcher, as I see it. Maybe yeah, it will be useful also, yeah. I try to use an intersectional approach. I'm not including it in my today presentation because I had no time for it. But yes, of course. About applicability, Western lifestyle and identities. It's a very complicated question. It's a very good question. Because on the one hand, yeah, of course, we need to reflect about applicability, Western identities, about local context. But on the other hand, there is globalization and global processes, and all my participants read different sites, books, many of them speak English, read in English. So I think it's kind of exotization when we say that Western identities are not applicable for Russian context. Yeah, like Loresic wrote about it in the 1990s. Yeah, when she said it's queer. There is no identities. all is complicated. Just queer. Well. Yeah, but okay. I think I need to write more about it, more and more. Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Just a quick note on the self-positionality. I think even in the Russian language academia, it's pretty legit. It's getting more and more legitimate, actually, to be more explicit about how you relate to the field and to your informants or people you've talked to. And it's not that rigid anymore, and maybe it's also a part of the paradigm change, right?
Mhm.
So if you don't stick to this, third person kind of white
Yeah.
lab coat approach, so this is something which is not fashionable anymore, even in the post-positivist academia. So I think you guys are clearly in a better position. But just a very quick note. I'm giving the floor